we all know Everton fans are famous for the booing. They love a boo more than any of the fans in the country, I think. We saw it at Goodison Park. It could turn quite toxic and quite hostile if the results were bad. So if United can kind of make the crowd turn on the team as such and make a really good start to the game, that'll hand them a big advantage.
NordVPN, cybersecurity built for every day.
Before we jump into this podcast, let's just have a first word from our sponsors, NordVPN, the fastest VPN in the world and an absolute essential travelling companion. You can use NordVPN on 10 devices with just one account, easily switching your virtual location to access apps and websites in other countries. But if you're out of the country, make sure that you've got NordVPN to be able to use your subscriptions and watch the live sport that you might miss. If you're at home, use it to see if you can save money with products that might be cheaper in another region. Go to nordvpn.com/Manchester to get 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. The link is also in the podcast description.
Hello and welcome to the Manchester's Red podcast. I'm Jack Flintham and I'm joined by Steven Railston. Steve, how are we?
Very well, Jack. On the back of a few days off my birthday, so I've got a spring in my step.
Oh, happy birthday.
Thank you very much. I've just been tucking in at some brownies there for coffee as I got back from the press conference. Some leftover brownies. Not very healthy, but you've got to enjoy the small things in life while you can.
Well, yeah, if you don't treat yourself on your birthday week, when can you treat yourself?
Completely agree.
United managed to give you a bit of a treat by giving you a press conference on Friday. So that's always nice.
I'm not sure that's how it works. I'm not sure the club messaged me on my birthday and said, would you like to come to the press conference because it's your birthday? It doesn't really work like that. But yeah, it was the press conference today. It was Youth Cup on Wednesday night and United play Everton on Monday. So back amongst the action because there's been a pretty long break in between games.
Definitely, and we'll go on to that in the second half of this podcast. But start with the first, I think about 4 or 5 minutes of the 8-minute press conference was taken up by questions surrounding Sir Jim Ratcliffe's comments on immigration. Now, they came out, I believe, last week. We haven't spoken to Carrick since then due to the break in the fixture list. But yeah, it was a response to Ratcliffe. And what did you sort of make to what he had to say?
Yeah, obviously, there's been a 13-day break between games. And then Ratcliffe's interview, when he made those comments, I think was made last Wednesday. So Michael Carrick's had 9 days to prepare himself for this press conference because inevitably when those comments were made by Sir Jim Ratcliffe, Carrick was going to be asked about them. I think if you were a member of the communications team at United, as I said, when we discussed the quotes initially, you would have checked your phone and went, oh, for God's sake, what's he said now? Because, I mean, as me and Tyrone said, whenever he opens his mouth, it is a disaster. And it was a disaster. So he's had time to be coached into how to respond to this. The opening 2 questions were about Ratcliffe's comments, obviously about immigration in the country. The interview was about politics, and Ratcliffe used the word colonised, I think, as we all know by now. And yeah, Carrick handled it very well, as you'd expect. He's quite calm and composed in press conferences. We know that by now, and he doesn't really give you too much. But I thought he'd give quite a thoughtful answer. He'd said, look, the club have made a statement. Sir Jim Ratcliffe has made a statement, and he didn't really feel it was his place to add too much to that. But he did say that he is proud of what Manchester United stands for and spoke about the environment at the football club in terms of diversity and inclusion, because historically that's always what the club has stood for. We've seen a lot of different fan groups, whether that be the Muslim supporter club or the local supporter club or Must, for example, and all these different supporter groups, perhaps all from different walks of life, have all spoken out against these comments from Sir Jim Ratcliffe. There's been a lot of unhappy fans, and there's been emails sent to the club. There's even been unhappy staff who have raised concerns about those comments. So it was the first time to ask Carrick about it. And as I say, I thought he did reasonably well. It's probably now going to be nipped in the bud. There was a question in the second section or 2 about it as well. I think my understanding is Carrick hasn't spoken to the players about it. I'm not sure he will now, but inevitably they would have seen the quote. There's players in that squad with Kobbie Mainoo, for example, with heritage from all over the world. Mainly's got Ghanaian heritage, and these players they don't live on the rocks. They're on social media. They would have seen these quotes. So it's up to Carrick to kind of get them together again and look ahead to the Everton game. And he'd mentioned that. He said, look, the support amongst each other is brilliant. We're a good, close, knitted group. And I think from speaking to players this season, whether that be Dorgu when I was in Carrington or Fernandez or in the mix on numerous occasions throughout the season, it does seem like a good group at the moment. They do seem to be together and supporting each other, and I think you see little bits of that on social media as well. So it's up to the players to rally around each other now and not let that outside noise affect their performances.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned there it was a curveball for Carrick, wasn't it? And it's something he wouldn't have necessarily wanted to have been talking about after such a long break and the Everton game to come, which is important for keeping momentum going. Just on that again, what do you feel the consequences are for United after this? Because now we've had the interim head coach has spoken about it. It's one that will inevitably rise up again once Ratcliffe speaks again, because as the co-owner of United, he's not going to never speak again to the media, so he's bound to be questioned about this again. What sort of long term do you think the consequences are for the Reds?
Well, long-term commercially, I think there will be consequences. But in terms of the short-term, the FA had said they indicated they were looking into the quote, into whether or not Ratcliffe would have faced any action from the governing body. My understanding today, he's essentially been spoken to. The FA have reminded him of his responsibilities when he does conduct media interviews, but they won't be taking any further action. So that's the kind of stance from the FA. In terms of consequences for the actual football club itself, you've got a lot of unhappy fans, as we mentioned. How that damages Sir Jim Ratcliffe's reputation even more. He wasn't exactly very popular anyways because of his off-field decisions, raising Premier League tickets to £66, no concessions, the mistakes that he's made in terms of sacking managers and wasting millions of pounds on compensation, when in every single penny in other departments of the club has been scrutinised very intensely, and the cost cutting is no bounds. Will be interesting, but commercially, it's going to hurt United, you'd think, because at the moment the sleeve sponsor ends at the end of the season. So DXE Technology is a current deal. I think it's £22 million that deal is being worth. That's set to expire at the end of the season. They've gone this campaign without a training ground kit sponsor for the first time in a few years. It was formerly Tezos. So when Matthias Cunha arrived to the club, Tezos was on his training kit. But by the time that Brian Burmo had arrived from Brentford, that was absent. So if you look at the footage and the imagery from training this season, that's why there's no sponsor on the kit. That was worth around 24. So you've got sponsorship packages that are worth almost £50 million there together, close to. And obviously that's a lot of money, especially when you're not qualifying for Europe. United need new sponsors in. They need it to comply within PSR, to sign the best players and to compete with the best clubs. And inevitably, these comments from Sir Jim Ratcliffe are going to have an impact. If you are a brand, and especially in the state of the world at the moment, it's probably in a state of flux, and with AI and the changes financially, industries in all aspects are getting hit by these changes financially. Are you going to want to commit such a massive outlay, such a significant outlay to sponsor a football club if their co-owner is attached to such comments? It's going to be a red flag, isn't it? Of course it is. And we'll have to see how this one plays out, because it would be fascinating in the summer. We've been kind of told all along in the last 6 months or a year that there's been a strong pipeline of potential new sponsors, but they've gone this season without the training kit sponsor. And now, obviously, the sleeve sponsor's going to expire at the end of the campaign. So instead of just talking about those potential sponsors, they need to reach deals with those sponsors. And perhaps Ratcliffe's comment will have an impact when those deals are being thrashed out, I imagine in the next few months or in the summer. Yeah,
and I suppose another asset where this could also have consequences is the stadium as well. Andy Burnham's been a big supporter of the Old Trafford regeneration project, hasn't he? And he came out quite strongly against Ratcliffe. Prime Minister Keir Starmer's been invited fairly recently to Old Trafford to discuss plans. It's once again, he also condemns the comments. Does this impact potentially the support he gets, particularly from the government and the Greater Manchester Mayor?
Yeah, very well could, as we discussed last week or so, a week and a half ago. You want to be seen as cozying up to these kind of political figures, don't you? And Ratcliffe has done a lot of that. As you said, Keir Starmer was invited to the director's box in May 2024 to watch the Arsenal game. Starmer's obviously an Arsenal fan. And annoying these people and kind of rubbing them up the wrong way with such comments, not only does it go against the kind of role you have as a custodian for the football club and the way you should present yourself in public, but then it kind of antagonises the wrong people who you should be kind of cozying up with to help a potential new stadium. Now, I think an important aspect is that land behind the Stretford end. And I've mentioned it as well, because Freightliner own that land and United need that plot to push ahead with the new stadium. Obviously, it was 2030-31, which was picked out as the season that the stadium should be built by. That was the target when plans were unveiled last year down at the event in London. But we've not seen forks and spades in the ground so far. It's still at a very early stage. And that land is crucial to pushing on with the project. Now, Andy Birmingham had mentioned using compulsory purchase powers to help Ratcliffe and the football club to acquire that land. And again, it's not exactly a good look, is it, if you're antagonising these kind of people? Having said that, and Ty made this point when we get into it, it's politics is politics. The wheel continues to turn, and sometimes these comments will be brushed aside for the greater good, for the region. This project and the regeneration of the Old Trafford site is going to bring in millions and millions of pounds and jobs and businesses, and it's going to be huge for the area, not just for the football club. So for that reason, bridges will probably be healed and mended, and people will come together and sit around the table to perhaps acquire this land, because at the moment it has gone very quiet, and it might seem that is what is needed, those compulsory purchase powers to be pushed through.
And just moving away now from the Ratcliffe comments and Carrick's response to that, he was also asked about the prospect of a mid-season friendly being on the cards. We've mentioned already it's been a long time since United last played a game. There was talk about it also being a commercial opportunity as well for the club, but potentially more importantly from Carrick's perspective about getting minutes into the legs of these players. He was pretty non-committal about which way he would go with friendlies. But what did you sort of make of that response?
Yeah, Carrick's been asked a few times now about whether United will play a mid-season friendly, and I mean the answers have been very similar, very wishy-washy and non-committal, as you just said. So there was probably no further clues, if I'm honest. I think the suggestion is now that the can might be kicked down the road, and it might be, if it is Saudi Arabia, which you've been mentioned, then it might be in the summer instead of during the season. But there's going to be an opportunity twice, actually, because there's an 11-day gap between the Newcastle game on March 4 and between Aston Villa on March 15. So they could jet out during that period. And then there's a 22-day gap between playing Bournemouth on March the 20th and facing Leeds on April the 11th. But the first weekend of that is the international break, which will obviously come into it. You could go out there potentially with a very young squad, for example, just to raise money. It's for a game could raise as much as £5 million, and that would be incredibly helpful considering the lack of European football this season and going out the cup competitions early. But I think from reading in between the lines at the moment, I think it would have been arranged by now if they were going to go out there, and I think it will be pushed to summer. Obviously, I mean, 40 games this season, it's not enough matches, is it? It's not enough matches if you're a fan, if you're a player, if you're the head coach, if you're a journalist. We want to see more football. We want to report on the actual football games, not make this podcast into Restor's politics. Obviously, the fewest games for 115 years, 1914, 1915. But that's because they crashed out the cup competitions. So, look, it does give them an opportunity to work on the training ground. And I think for Carrick, that is valuable time. He's used it very well. The players were given a little break after the West Ham draw. Bruno Fernandes went to Portugal. Senna Lommans went to Belgium to visit his former club, Royal Antwerp. He's greeted like a hero upon his return. A few of the players were in Dubai, a bit of warm weather training. I think Dorgu was across there, obviously recovering from a hamstring injury. So you can use this time in different ways. They'll obviously return to training on Wednesday after that mini break. And I think it'll help the players after a very intense run after Carrick's appointment to get that little mini break, to actually have some time to themselves, a few days to themselves, to do what they want. Let's face it, they're people too. They want to see it. They want to spend time with their families. They want to go and perhaps get a bit of sun on their backs. Because if you hadn't realised, Jack, it's been quite miserable, the weather in Manchester here over the last few weeks. It has not stopped raining. So I'd probably go to Dubai if I could too, in that little mini break. So potentially there could just be more of that in that 22-day gap or the 11-day gap that's coming up at the end of March, at the start of April. Perhaps it'll just be used in the same way. Bit of training time, a bit of a few trips to Dubai for the boys.
Bring your digital life to a whole new level with NordVPN. Choose the fastest VPN on the planet and explore the internet without interruption.
Right, welcome back to the Manchester's Red podcast. And as we mentioned, it's Everton on Monday. It's been a long break for them, but as you say, there's been some training, there's been some break with the families and jetting off here, there and everywhere. It'll be an interesting one, travelling to Everton, a new stadium for the players as well. How do you see this one sort of playing out?
A chance to return to winning ways, isn't it, after the West Ham draw? I think it was important, as I said, to salvage a point at the London Stadium, because if they lost that game, I think the momentum would have been damaged and lost after a very good run, 4 wins against some big teams, City and Arsenal, of course. So important to salvage a point down there and kind of keep that good feeling intact. And that's been the feeling around the place this week at Carrington. And then it's Everton, which has to be a good opportunity. But it's a really interesting game in terms of the actual opponent themselves, because they're probably quite similar to West Ham. We've spoken about the different tactical challenges that Carrick's had in the first few games, and City and Arsenal, those matches were quite similar, where United could sit back and kind of soak up that pressure and transition really well and punish those sides. But West Ham was a different game. They defended a lot more deep, or should we use the phrase low block, which has become very fashionable. As a man who likes his XG, I probably don't use low block, though. That's where I draw the line. Just a team defending deep, isn't it? So Everton should play very similar. And now, look, United struggled to break down West Ham. Ahmad Kuna and Burmo have been brilliant, but they struggled to get into that game. And I think we're all very surprised that Sesko didn't start against West Ham. 5 goals in his last 6 games now. He is playing full of confidence, and he has to start, doesn't he? It's an absolute no-brainer to start Sesko for me. If he doesn't start, it would be a shock. It would be a massive shock. Because at some point, when a player keeps performing and keeps contributing from the bench, they have to be rewarded with a start. It would be incredibly demoralising for Sesko if he continued on the bench on Monday night. But when you look at the kind of the opponents and the way the game was played against West Ham, yeah, he has to come in, and I think he'd make a big difference, to be fair. I discussed the finish against West Ham, Sesko's, and the kind of technical ability that he has. That's what kind of sets him apart from Rasmus Højlund for me. The technique on that finish, I think I said at the time, if he'd moved his foot slightly to the left by an inch or slightly to the right, that ball was skewing past the post. It was a real centre-forward's goal, a proper striker's goal. And he's had a really good 2026. It's almost as if he just needed Ruben Amorim to be sacked and get off his back to start scoring goals. So Sesko's come to life now, and it's been brilliant to see. But yeah, he has to start, and he'll bring others into the game, won't he? I think United lacked that focal point. Carrick took his time to get him on. He showed he was human, made his first mistake, his first team selection mistake since his appointment in that match. I don't think he'll make it again.
Do you think there's an element to why Sesko hasn't been starting? Is it been a little bit safe from Carrick so far? Because obviously his only changes he's made since being appointment have been enforced. I mean, it was the Dorgu change because of his injury against Arsenal. Do you think there's an element of that he's potentially been a little bit too safe? And as you say, that mistake of not starting him against West Ham probably won't be repeated.
I think it's just a case of why change something that isn't broken. United were playing well, securing wins. There was no need to change the team. And even though I've gone as far as calling it a mistake by not starting Sesko against West Ham, if you put yourself in Michael Carrick's shoes, you can understand the logic and just continuing with that unchanged team, because the players had rewarded them for the last 4 games. So he's just thought, well, I'll roll the dice again and let's crack on down at London Stadium and see if they can do it again against West Ham. Managers are quite often loyal to players who perform. So I could see that. I understood it from Michael Carrick. But sometimes you need to step back, perhaps rely on the advice of your coaching staff. And it can be very difficult when you're in it. But if you look at it from a different perspective, perhaps, then you could have maybe seen that it was the right choice to start Sesko. And as I say, look, you've got to learn from your mistakes. I think it was a mistake, but I don't think he'll make it again. But what I will say is I've praised Carrick for his man management, which he's had to be good at, because there's such few fixtures. They're only going to play 40 games this season. There's not enough games to share around everyone. So you need to be a good man manager. And thankfully he is. You can clearly see it, the way the players run to him when they score, the way they all celebrate. They might be on the bench, but even if they are, they'll still be celebrating. And clearly Carrick's tapped into something there. And he is a good man manager. Particularly with Sesko, there's been a few moments after games where I've noticed him put an arm around Sesko and have a little chat. He did that against Fulham. He's done it on a few other occasions, and this kind of Sesko improvement, should we say, you can't really call it a renaissance, because that implies that he was really, really struggling out of sorts, and I wouldn't go that far. It started with Darren Fletcher and the individual work Fletcher was doing with Sesko during his caretaker stint. Obviously managed games against Burnley and Brighton. Sesko rewarded them and reacted fantastically well. And I remember Darren Fletcher in that press conference room at Turf Moor. It was important to stress that it was Sesko that deserved all the credit. I think us guys as journalists kind of latched on to Fletcher saying that he'd showed him video and he'd sat him down, but he said, look, Ben's really hungry. He's working really hard. And it's fascinating, really. The club released an interview with Sesko, and he is a really, really interesting guy. For 22 years old, he was discussing his kind of meditation techniques, how he likes to visualise what he's going to do at the weekend when he plays. There's a few other Premier League players. I think Anthony Gordon has explained that he does that as well, actually. I think he did an interview with Gary Neville. I seem to remember his quote, where some players like to sit down, close their eyes and visualise what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. So look, if it works for you, then fair play. It's not exactly my cup of tea. I don't sit there and visualise how I'm going to write an article on a Saturday afternoon when I turn up to Old Trafford to report on a game. But it's clearly working for Sesko. He's very mature from what I can tell. He's got a very wise head on young shoulders, and he's starting to really put it together now, which is really encouraging. I'm actually trying to write a feature about Sesko at the moment, and I've contacted his former club in Slovenia. And I stumbled across some photos from his time at RB Salzburg, and he invited that football club across to Austria to come watch him. And the youngsters who were part of that club are teenagers, and they were just absolutely made up to meet Sesko. So, obviously went across after the game. He was signing their shirts and getting photos, and he seems like a really good egg. And that was that's been a big thing over the last 2 seasons, the know something heads policy. I'll not swear because we've got sponsors, but I always say sometimes it's not rocket science football. Just sign decent personalities, players who are going to come in, do all the right things, graft their off for the team and do all the right things in that regard. And that goes a long way. If you've perhaps not made the start that you wanted, which Sesko didn't, if you do the right things, inevitably you'll start to score goals, and he has.
Yeah, it's half the battle, isn't it? If your head's screwed on and you've got the right mindset, and and as you say, it's interesting as well with Senna Larmans. I think he's spoken about how he journals, and that's his way of sort of visualizing and getting himself in the right mindset.
What would you write in your journal this week, Jack? What would you write?
Gosh, I don't think you want to know. That's really put me on the spot, that has, Steve. But ready for a holiday.
That's just implied you're up to something untoward there. We don't want to know. Family podcast. Let's not get into it then. Let's move
on. Yes, let's move on. And moving on to injury news, and obviously feels like I imagine Carrick's probably sick of fielding questions on this, but Mason Mount and Matthias de Ligt particularly. Now, we were told initially all the way back in November and December that de Ligt's issue wasn't going to be too long. Obviously, it's sadly turned out that it has been quite a serious issue. He's still out and he's behind Mason Mount in his recovery. What do you sort of sense on the pair of them when we could be seeing them coming back into the fold?
Well, in the second section of the press conference, Carrick actually confirmed that De Ligt had passed away, unfortunately. So he won't be seen for the rest of the season. Thankfully, De Ligt is alive and kicking and very much still at Carrington reporting for treatment. That was just a joke, I'll clarify.
Probably for the best.
The questions about, look, the team news has been exactly the same for the last few weeks. Mason Mount was last in the squad against Arsenal, picked up an injury in the build-up to the Fulham game, a little knock, and that's been enough to keep him out. De Ligt last played against Crystal Palace on November the 30th down at Selhurst Park. The De Ligt one, we've discussed it. It's strange because Ruben Amorim had said he expects him just to be out for a game. And here we are 2.5 months later and he's still out, unfortunately. And at that point of the season, De Ligt was the only player in the squad to have played every single minute in the Premier League. So particularly disappointing to see him be out for so long, considering the fantastic start that he had. And I've made the point a few times now. He was probably, alongside Mbeumo, of course, the player of the season for me at that stage. He was having a really good year, a really good campaign. His best yet since joining the club. We're seeing a string of consistent performances, really good performances. I spoke to him a few times in the mix zones as he was leaving the games as well, down at Brentford and I think Anfield. There was another occasion he spoke twice, and he was taking responsibility. You could tell he'd become a real leader, is what I'm trying to say, in that dressing room. Now, he was obviously not included in the leadership group in the summer when those players were nominated, but he was leading in a different way. And Amorim was asked about that, and he said that. He said, look, different players lead in different ways, and De Ligt was doing that. So a huge shame. The situation's still unchanged. Be good to have Mason Mount back. If he is back in the squad on Monday, Carrick did not go as far as to confirm that he would be in the squad, but the expectation is that he will be. Mount, it's been, again, a really frustrating one because for the first time, really, he had genuine momentum. And he was playing really well. 3 goals, Brentford, Sunderland, Crystal Palace, some decisive goals in that run as well. Put together a run of 14 games without picking up an injury between September and December, and was starting to look like a player worthy of that number 7 shirt. His running had really endeared himself to support, as he was the catalyst for the press in many matches. And I think we spoke to him after the Brentford game, and he said that. He said, like, I see myself as the catalyst for the press, that I want to do that. I want to get out there and get in their faces, and his teammates were following him. So a real shame to see him pick up that injury. Obviously, since Carrick's come in, he's not started. And then long term, I guess it raises the question of where he fits in when he does come back, because he perfectly fitted those number 10 roles, really, in Ruben Amorim's system. Ruben Amorim absolutely loved Mason Mount. We all know that. He spoke about his fondness for Mount on a few occasions. And now Mount's got the challenge of kind of forcing his way into Carrick's system. And I still think he's very versatile. I still don't think it's as cut and dry as saying that he'll be competing with Bruno Fernandes, which, as Cobby Manu knows, is incredibly difficult, because obviously Fernandes is operating in that number 10 role, and you'd probably think that's where Mount would most want to play. But he can play off the left and he can play on the right. He could even play through the middle. It's just a shame that he's picked up another injury, especially because it was just a knock, and he's obviously been out for a few games now. But he will strengthen the options. Carrick's obviously basically got a fully fit squad. It's De Ligt, Dorgu and Mount at the moment who are sidelined. And it's a strange situation because there's such few matches. It's, in a way, he's probably not complaining. If everyone was fit, there'd be absolutely no room for anyone almost, and there's going to be some tough decisions made. I think Malacia would be the logical one to obviously drop out the squad. He was supposed to leave in the summer, he was supposed to leave in January, and he's still been on the bench a few times. But obviously there's youngsters there who are vying for a place in the squad as well. But once these players return, it'll be tough for them to be included on the match day. Yeah,
and I suppose just finally on the Everton game, for United now, Champions League is it has been the focus and the objective through the entirety of the season. It's even more so now that there's only the Premier League to focus on. A win at Everton, they'll know how everyone else has done beforehand, but it'll be huge, I suppose, psychologically as well, to kind of banish those demons, because we've touched on it already, and probably keeping it at arm's length considering how bad the memory was. But it was a particularly poor performance in the reverse fixture. But if they can somehow come back and show that they can they can beat a team like Everton, especially a new stadium and where the atmosphere, you'd imagine, will be quite hostile for United. It'll be a good boost in their hopes for the top four and the Champions League, won't it?
Yeah, it's a different manager, a different formation, a different feeling altogether from that 1-0 defeat in November. Obviously, Everton got the red card, but United still found a way to lose that match. It was a really poor performance. Yeah, it's interesting. I was on the kind of equivalent to this podcast at Liverpool Echo to give the opposition view ahead of the game. So I think it was an Everton fan doing it, actually. I don't think it was a journalist. It was kind of the fan channel equivalent. And he'd provided some insight into the kind of feeling at the Hill Dickinson Stadium this season. And I thought it was all quite rosy. I mean, Everton are 8th in the table. And when you look at the resources that David Moyes has got, you think that's probably as good as they're going to get. But I think the feeling isn't too good at the moment across at Everton. They've struggled at home. They've only won 4 games. They've drawn 4, and there's been some really bad performances at the Hill Dickinson. Newcastle won 4-1 there. Wolves have got a point there. I think Bournemouth won 2-1 there the other week. So these are teams you'd expect, if you're an Everton fan, to be doing a lot better against than they have. So there is a little bit of unrest. And I think if United start the game fast, they can get an early goal. We all know Everton fans are famous for the booing. They love a boo more than any of the fans in the country, I think. We saw it at Goodison Park. It could turn quite toxic and quite hostile if the results were bad. So if United can kind of make the crowd turn on the team as such and make a really good start to the game, that'll hand them a big advantage. But yeah, I think you just discussed the game in November, didn't you? The 1-0, a different manager, a different formation, a different kind of feeling around the football club. Everything's changed in just 2 months. It's obviously a completely different match. But I guess from an Everton perspective, it should provide them with encouragement that they can get a result. And when I was speaking to this fan on the Everton podcast, he was discussing kind of their Monday kick at the Monday night games, which United have had a lot of. And it's an opportunity. Their fans will see it as an opportunity to get a result and create an atmosphere, because it's always a big game. It's traditionally a big fixture, United-Everton. I expect that to be a pretty decent noise at the Hill Dickinson. And I'm looking forward to seeing what food they've got to offer in the press box. Obviously, if you go into a new stadium, it's you're not sure, and you can't look back at previous seasons to see what you've eaten. I think best food I've had was at Stamford Bridge. It's always very good down there. It's basically a 3-course meal. The desserts are gorgeous. I need to be careful talking about desserts. I was eating brownies before and I'm ending the podcast talking about desserts. So yeah, looking forward to the trip. Yeah, definitely. And I was just about to say I was going to leave you to get on with the chocolate brownie today and set up your weekend on a good note. But yeah, thanks for joining me. And as ever, you'll find all the rest of the Manchester United news over on the Manchester Evening News website. But until next time, thank you and goodbye.